The summer heat was almost unbearable that Tuesday afternoon in London. Sweat dripped down foreheads as tourists walked the busy streets, looking for shade wherever they could find it. The temperature had climbed to 32 degrees, making it one of the hottest days of the year. Among the crowd of visitors was a 28-year-old man from Texas. He had been planning this trip to London for months, saving every penny he could from his job at a local car dealership. This was his first time visiting Europe, and he was determined to make the most of every single moment. Walking beside him was his girlfriend, who had been dating him for 2 years. She was more cautious by nature, always thinking twice before doing anything that might get them into trouble. She carried a small backpack filled with water bottles, snacks, and a guidebook that she had studied cover to cover before their trip. They had spent the morning visiting the Tower of London, taking photos of the famous ravens and learning about the castle's bloody history. The afternoon plan was simple but exciting. Visit Buckingham Palace and see the famous guards that everyone talks about. As they approached the palace gates, the man bought a vanilla ice cream cone from a street vendor. The ice cream was already starting to melt in the heat, small drops falling onto his hand as he tried to eat it quickly. His girlfriend warned him to be careful, but he just laughed it off. The palace looked even more magnificent than in the photos. The golden gates sparkled in the sunlight, and the red brick walls seemed to stretch on forever. Tourists from all over the world gathered around, speaking different languages and taking countless photos. But what caught everyone's attention most was the guard standing perfectly still near the main entrance. He wore the traditional red uniform with gold buttons, and on his head sat the famous black bearskin hat that made him look much taller than he actually was. This guard had been standing in the same spot for almost an hour. His name was David, and he had been serving as a royal guard for 3 years. Despite the heat, he stood completely motionless, his face showing no expression at all. Sweat was building up under his heavy uniform, but years of training had taught him to ignore any discomfort. David came from a military family. His father had served in the army, and his grandfather before him. When he was young, he dreamed of following in their footsteps. After finishing school, he joined the military and worked his way up to become one of the elite guards protecting the royal family. Standing guard at Buckingham Palace was both an honor and a challenge. The uniform weighed several pounds, and the bearskin hat alone was incredibly heavy. During summer months like this, guards had to be extra careful not to faint from the heat. David had seen it happen to other guards, and he was determined never to let it happen to him. The job required incredible discipline. No matter what happened around him, David had to remain perfectly still. Tourists could shout, wave, or try to get his attention, but he could not react. The only time he was allowed to move was if someone tried to touch him or his equipment, or if there was a real emergency. As David stood there, he could hear the excited chatter of tourists around him. Children pointed at his tall hat and asked their parents questions about why he dressed that way. Adults took selfies trying to get the perfect shot with him in the background. The Texas tourist finished his ice cream cone and pulled out his phone. Like many visitors, he wanted to get a photo with the famous guard. His girlfriend stood nearby, reading from her guidebook about the history of the royal guards and their important role in protecting the monarchy. The crowd around them was growing larger. A bus full of tourists from Japan had just arrived, and everyone was eager to see the guard up close. People pushed gently forward, each trying to get the best view and the best photos. What none of them knew was that this particular afternoon would become one that everyone present would remember for years to come. The peaceful tourist scene was about to turn into something completely unexpected. The Texas man looked at his melting ice cream, then at the motionless guard, then back at his phone. An idea was forming in his mind, an idea that seemed funny to him in that moment but would soon prove to be one of the worst decisions of his life. His girlfriend noticed the mischievous look in his eyes. She had seen that expression before, usually right before he did something that would embarrass them both. She tugged at his arm gently, sensing that whatever he was thinking probably wasn't a good idea. But he wasn't listening. His attention was completely focused on the guard, and the opportunity he thought he saw for what he believed would be the perfect social media moment. The crowd around them continued to grow, and the Texas tourist began to step forward, his phone ready to record what he thought would be a hilarious prank. The stage was set for a moment that would change everything, not just for him and his girlfriend, but for everyone watching. Sometimes the most ordinary days can turn extraordinary in the worst possible way, and this was about to become one of those days. The Texas tourist looked around at the crowd of people surrounding the Royal Guard. Everyone was taking photos, but they were all keeping a respectful distance. Some children were giggling and pointing, while their parents explained the importance of the guards and why they had to stand so still. In his mind, he thought he had come up with the perfect idea for a viral video. He had seen pranks like this online before, where people tried to make the guards react or break their serious expression. He convinced himself that it would be harmless fun, something that would get thousands of views and likes on social media. His girlfriend could see the wheels turning in his head. She knew him well enough to recognize when he was about to do something foolish. She grabbed his arm more firmly this time and whispered urgently in his ear. "Don't even think about it," she said quietly, hoping no one else could hear. "These guards are real soldiers. This isn't some tourist attraction where you can mess around." But he brushed off her concerns with a wave of his hand. The ice cream in his other hand was melting faster now, creating a sticky mess on his fingers. Instead of seeing this as a problem, he saw it as an opportunity. "Come on, it'll be funny," he whispered back to his girlfriend. "He can't move anyway. It's just a harmless joke. People do this stuff all the time." His girlfriend shook her head firmly. She had read in the guidebook about how serious these guards were, and how much respect they deserved. They weren't entertainers or actors in costumes. They were real military personnel with an important job to do. "Please don't," she pleaded one more time, but she could see in his eyes that he had already made up his mind. The crowd around them was getting more excited as more tourists arrived. A group of teenagers from Germany were taking turns posing near the guard, being careful not to get too close. An elderly couple from Australia were asking their daughter to take their photo from a respectful distance. David, the guard, could hear all the commotion around him, but his training kept him focused straight ahead. He had dealt with difficult tourists before. Some tried to make him laugh by telling jokes loudly. Others would wave their hands right in front of his face. A few had even tried to tickle him or poke him gently. But David knew the rules perfectly. His job was to protect the palace and maintain the dignity of his position. He represented not just himself but the entire Royal Guard and the British military. Breaking character even for a moment would be a serious failure of his duty. The Texas tourist started moving closer to David. His girlfriend tried one last time to stop him, but he was already pulling away from her grip. The melting ice cream dripped steadily from the cone onto the ground, leaving a trail behind him. As he approached the guard, other tourists began to notice what was happening. Some moved their cameras to point in his direction, sensing that something interesting might be about to occur. Others, who understood the seriousness of the situation better, started looking uncomfortable. A British family nearby recognized the signs of trouble brewing. The father whispered to his wife that they should move their children away from what was about to happen. He had lived in London his whole life and knew that interfering with the Royal Guards was not taken lightly by authorities. The Texas tourist was now just 3 feet away from David. He could see the guard's face clearly now, young, serious, and completely focused on his duty. For just a moment he hesitated. Something about the guard's dedication and professionalism made him pause. But the pause didn't last long. The crowd behind him was watching expectantly, and his phone was already recording. In his mind, he had gone too far to back down now. He told himself that guards dealt with this kind of thing all the time, and that it really would be harmless. What he didn't understand was the difference between tourists accidentally bumping into guards or trying to get their attention, and deliberately targeting them with what could be considered an assault. The line between harmless tourist behavior and criminal activity was much thinner than he realized. David sensed the approaching tourist but remained perfectly still, just as he had been trained to do. However, he was also prepared to respond appropriately if the situation escalated beyond normal tourist behavior. The moment of decision arrived. The Texas tourist raised his hand with the melting ice cream cone, aiming it directly at David's perfectly clean red uniform. His girlfriend covered her face with her hands, unable to watch what was about to happen. "Don't do it," someone in the crowd shouted, but it was too late. Without thinking about the consequences, the tourist smeared the melting vanilla ice cream directly across the front of David's red tunic. The cold, sticky mess spread across the fabric, leaving a large white stain on the immaculate uniform. The crowd gasped in shock. Some people started recording with their phones while others stepped back in disbelief. Children pointed at the mess, not understanding why the adults around them suddenly looked so worried. The Texas tourist stepped back with a huge grin on his face, still recording with his phone. In that moment, he felt like he had accomplished something amazing. He thought he had created the perfect viral video moment that would make him famous online. His girlfriend stared at him in horror, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. She knew immediately that this was not going to end well, but even she couldn't imagine how quickly everything was about to change. David, still standing perfectly still with ice cream dripping down his uniform, activated his emergency communication system. His face remained expressionless, but inside he was following the exact protocols he had been trained for when dealing with aggressive or destructive tourists. The Texas tourist was still smiling and admiring his phone, recording when he noticed that the crowd around him had gone completely silent. People were staring at him with expressions of shock and disapproval rather than amusement. That's when he heard the sound that would haunt him for months to come, the rapid footsteps of multiple people running directly toward him. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the courtyard as 3 police officers rushed toward the scene. They had been stationed nearby, as they always were during busy tourist hours at Buckingham Palace. Their job was to watch for exactly this kind of situation. The Texas tourist was still looking at his phone, admiring the video he had just recorded, when the first officer reached him. The smile disappeared from his face instantly as he realized that this wasn't going according to his plan at all. "Sir, I need you to put your hands where I can see them," commanded Officer Johnson, a veteran of 15 years with the Metropolitan Police. He had dealt with countless incidents involving tourists and the Royal Guards, but he never got used to seeing the disrespect some people showed. The tourist looked around in confusion, his phone still in his hand. "Wait, what's going on?" "I was just having some fun. It's not a big deal, right?" Officer Wilson, who had arrived from the other side, stepped forward with a serious expression. "Sir, you've just committed criminal damage to government property and potentially assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard. This is very much a big deal." The crowd, that had been watching and laughing just moments before now, stood in stunned silence. Many people were still recording with their phones, but the mood had completely changed. What had seemed like a harmless prank was quickly becoming a serious legal situation. The tourist's girlfriend pushed through the crowd, her face pale with worry. "Officers, please, he didn't mean any harm. He's not from here, he doesn't understand the rules. Can't we just apologize and clean up the mess?" Officer Chen, the third officer to arrive, shook her head while pulling out her handcuffs. "I'm afraid it doesn't work that way, miss. Ignorance of the law isn't an excuse, especially when it involves interfering with the duties of the Royal Guard." The Texas tourist began to panic as he saw the handcuffs. The reality of the situation was finally starting to sink in. "This is crazy. It's just ice cream. I'll pay for dry cleaning or whatever. Come on, this is way too much." David, the guard, remained perfectly still throughout the entire commotion. Ice cream was still dripping slowly down his red uniform, but he showed no emotion at all. This level of professionalism and self-control made the tourist's actions look even more disrespectful in comparison. More police officers were arriving on the scene now. The area around Buckingham Palace was one of the most heavily monitored locations in London, and any incident involving the guards was taken extremely seriously. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Johnson began, as he guided the tourist's hands behind his back. "Anything you say may be given in evidence." The tourist couldn't believe what was happening. In his mind, he had expected maybe a stern warning or at most a small fine. The idea that he could actually be arrested for what he thought was a harmless joke had never occurred to him. His girlfriend was crying now, trying to understand how their dream vacation had turned into a nightmare so quickly. She approached the officers desperately. "Please, isn't there anything we can do? We're supposed to fly home in 3 days. This is our honeymoon trip." The crowd of tourists watched in fascination and horror as the handcuffs clicked into place. Children asked their parents what was happening, while adults whispered among themselves about how foolish the American tourist had been. A Japanese tourist who had been taking photos nearby shook his head sadly. "In Japan, we would never dream of disrespecting a guard like this," he said to his wife. "This man has brought shame on all tourists." The German teenagers who had been posing for photos earlier were now recording everything with their phones. "This is going to be all over the internet in an hour," one of them said. But not in the way he wanted. Officer Wilson was now searching the tourist's pockets and backpack for identification. "What's your name, sir? And can I see your passport?" "Look, my name is—" "Does this really matter? Can't we just work something out here? I'm really sorry about this whole thing." The tourist was starting to sweat heavily, and not just from the heat. "Yes, it matters very much," Officer Chen replied firmly. "You're being charged with criminal damage and assault. We need to process you properly." As they began to escort him away, the tourist turned back toward David, the guard he had targeted. "I'm sorry, man. I really didn't think it was such a big deal. I was just trying to be funny." But David couldn't respond, even if he had wanted to. His duty required him to remain at his post until his replacement arrived, which wouldn't be for another hour. He would have to stand there with ice cream staining his uniform, maintaining his professional composure despite everything that had happened. The crowd began to disperse as the police led the tourist away, but many people were still taking photos and videos. The incident was already being uploaded to social media platforms, where it would soon reach millions of viewers around the world. His girlfriend followed behind the officers, pleading with them and trying to understand what would happen next. She had read about the British legal system in her guidebook, but she never imagined she would need to know about it firsthand. "Where are you taking him?" she asked Officer Johnson as they approached the police van. "He'll be processed at the local station," the officer replied. "You can contact a solicitor if you'd like. But I should warn you that this type of offense is taken very seriously here in the UK." As the police van doors closed, the Texas tourist found himself sitting in the back, still trying to process what had just happened. The metal handcuffs felt cold against his wrists, and the reality of his situation was finally becoming clear. Through the small window, he could see tourists still gathered around the palace, but now they were talking about him instead of admiring the architecture. He had wanted to be famous, and now he was, but for all the wrong reasons. The van started moving, taking him away from Buckingham Palace and toward a future he had never imagined when he woke up that morning. His dream vacation had become a legal nightmare, and there was no way to undo what he had done. The police station was nothing like what the Texas tourist had expected. The bright fluorescent lights hurt his eyes, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with coffee filled the air. Everything felt cold and official, a stark contrast to the warm summer day he had been enjoying just an hour before. He sat in a small holding cell, still trying to make sense of what had happened. The metal bench was uncomfortable, and the walls were painted a dull gray color that made everything feel even more depressing. Through the small window in the door, he could see officers walking back and forth, handling other cases. His phone had been taken away as evidence, along with his wallet and passport. Without these items, he felt completely helpless and cut off from the outside world. He couldn't call anyone, couldn't check social media, and couldn't even look up what kind of legal trouble he was really in. Officer Johnson came to speak with him after about 30 minutes. The officer's expression was serious but not unkind. He had seen many tourists make foolish decisions over the years, but he never enjoyed seeing someone's vacation turn into a legal nightmare. "Right then," Officer Johnson began, sitting down across from the tourist, "let's talk about what happened back there. Do you understand the seriousness of what you did?" The tourist shifted uncomfortably on the bench. "I'm starting to," he admitted quietly. "But honestly, I had no idea it would be such a big deal. Where I come from, people mess around with guards at tourist places all the time." "Well, you're not where you come from," Officer Johnson replied firmly. "You're in the United Kingdom, and those aren't actors in costumes. They're real soldiers with an important job to do." The tourist nodded, finally beginning to understand the gravity of his mistake. "What's going to happen to me now?" Officer Johnson pulled out a folder with some paperwork. "You're being charged with criminal damage to government property, which carries a maximum sentence of up to 10 years in prison, though for a first offense like this, it would likely be much less. You're also being charged with assault on a member of the armed forces." The tourist felt his stomach drop. 10 years? For ice cream? That can't be right. "The maximum sentence is rarely given for cases like this," Officer Johnson explained, "but the courts take any interference with the Royal Guards very seriously. You could be looking at a significant fine, community service, and possibly some jail time." Outside the station, the tourist's girlfriend was frantically trying to understand the British legal system. She had managed to contact the American embassy, but they explained that they could only provide limited assistance. Her boyfriend would need to face the British justice system, just like any other person who broke the law. She had also tried calling their travel insurance company, but they informed her that legal troubles resulting from criminal activity weren't covered under their policy. The money they had saved for their vacation was quickly disappearing as she tried to hire a local lawyer. Back at Buckingham Palace, David had finally been relieved of his duty and was changing into a clean uniform. His commanding officer, Sergeant Williams, was not pleased about the incident. "This is the third time this month we've had tourists interfering with the guards," Sergeant Williams said as David hung up his stained uniform. "It's getting out of hand." David nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. The tourists seemed to think it was just a harmless prank." "Harmless?" Sergeant Williams raised an eyebrow. "That uniform costs the government hundreds of pounds. And more importantly, you represent the Crown. Any attack on you is an attack on everything we stand for." Meanwhile, the video of the incident was already spreading across social media platforms. Someone in the crowd had posted it online with the caption, "Stupid American tourist gets arrested at Buckingham Palace." Within hours, it had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Most of the comments were not sympathetic to the tourist. People from around the world were expressing their disgust at his disrespectful behavior. Many British citizens were particularly angry, seeing his actions as an insult to their military and their country. Back at the police station, a lawyer had finally arrived to represent the tourist. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman with 20 years of experience in criminal law, explained the situation in clear terms. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "This isn't going to be easy. The authorities here take this kind of thing very seriously, especially when it involves the royal guards." The tourist was starting to realize that his problems were much bigger than he had imagined. "What are my options?" "Well, you can plead guilty and hope for leniency from the judge, or you can fight the charges and risk a harsher sentence if you're found guilty," the lawyer explained. "Given that there's video evidence and multiple witnesses, fighting the charges would be quite difficult." The tourist put his head in his hands. The excitement and joy of his London vacation seemed like a distant memory now. All he could think about was how he was going to explain this to his family back home, and how much this mistake was going to cost him. His girlfriend was finally allowed to visit him later that evening. When she saw him sitting in the holding cell, wearing the same clothes from that morning but looking completely different, she started crying again. "I'm so sorry," he said through the small window in the door. "I never thought this would happen. I've ruined everything." "The lawyer says we might be able to get you released on bail tomorrow," she said, trying to stay positive. "But the trial won't be for several weeks. We're going to have to extend our stay and pay for a hotel, and the lawyer fees, and..." The reality of their situation was becoming clearer by the hour. What was supposed to be a romantic vacation had turned into an expensive legal battle. Their savings account, which they had been planning to use for a down payment on a house, would now be spent on lawyers and court fees. That night, as the tourist lay on the hard bench in his cell, he couldn't stop thinking about how different things might have been if he had just listened to his girlfriend's warnings. One moment of poor judgment had changed everything, and there was no way to take it back. He thought about David, the guard whose uniform he had ruined, and felt genuinely ashamed for the first time since the incident occurred. The guard had been doing his job, serving his country with honor and dignity, and had been treated with complete disrespect by someone who should have known better. As he finally drifted off to sleep, the tourist realized that this experience was going to follow him for the rest of his life. Even after the legal troubles were resolved, the shame and embarrassment would remain, along with the knowledge that his actions had been seen by millions of people around the world. 3 months had passed since that terrible day at Buckingham Palace, and the Texas tourist was finally back home. But home didn't feel the same anymore. Everything had changed, and the consequences of his actions continued to affect every aspect of his life. The legal battle in London had lasted 6 weeks. He had eventually pleaded guilty to both charges, hoping that showing remorse would result in a lighter sentence. The judge had been somewhat lenient, given that it was his first offense, but the punishment was still severe by his standards. He had been fined £2,000, which translated to almost $3,000, He was also sentenced to 60 hours of community service, which he would have to complete once he returned to America under a special arrangement between the courts. Most significantly, he was banned from entering the United Kingdom for 5 years. The financial cost had been devastating. Between the fines, lawyer fees, extended hotel stays, and missed work, the incident had cost them over $15,000. The money they had been saving to buy their first home was completely gone, and they had accumulated significant credit card debt as well. But the money was only part of the problem. When he returned to work at the car dealership, his boss called him into the office on his first day back. The video of his arrest had been seen by everyone in their small Texas town, and several customers had specifically said they didn't want to work with him. "I'm sorry," his boss had said, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "You're a good worker, but this has become a business issue. The video is still circulating online and it's affecting our reputation." He was fired that same day, and finding new employment proved to be nearly impossible. Every potential employer could easily find the video by searching his name online. The phrase "Ice Cream Royal Guard" had become permanently associated with him on the internet. His relationship with his girlfriend had also suffered tremendously. The stress of the legal troubles, the financial burden, and the public embarrassment had taken a toll on both of them. They had argued constantly during their extended stay in London, and things hadn't improved much since their return. She had tried to be supportive, but she couldn't forget how he had ignored her warnings and proceeded with his foolish plan, despite her objections. The trust between them had been damaged, and they both knew it would take a long time to repair, if it could be repaired at all. The social media attention had been brutal. The video had been viewed millions of times across various platforms, and the comments were overwhelmingly negative. People from around the world had shared their opinions about his behavior, and very few of them were kind. He had tried creating new social media accounts to escape the negative attention, but someone always seemed to recognize him and connect his new accounts to the incident. The internet, he learned, never forgets. His family had been supportive but deeply disappointed. His parents, who had raised him to respect authority and show good manners, couldn't understand how their son had made such a poor decision. His younger sister had to deal with classmates at college who recognized her last name and asked if she was related to that guy who got arrested in London. The community service hours were a weekly reminder of his mistake. Every Saturday morning he reported to a local charity organization to help sort donations and clean facilities. The work itself wasn't difficult, but it was humbling to be there because of his own poor choices. During one of these Saturday morning sessions, he met an elderly volunteer who had served in the military during the Vietnam War. The man had seen the video online and recognized him. "Immediately, the veteran said quietly as they worked together. "Those guards you messed with are real soldiers. They've probably served in combat zones, risked their lives for their country. When you disrespected that guard, you disrespected every person who's ever worn a uniform." Those words hit harder than any of the online comments or legal consequences. For the first time, he truly understood the full impact of what he had done. It wasn't just a prank gone wrong. It was a genuine insult to people who had dedicated their lives to serving others. Meanwhile, back in London, David had returned to his normal duties as a Royal Guard. The incident had been just another day at work for him, though he had received commendations from his superiors for handling the situation with such professionalism. David never thought much about the tourist who had smeared ice cream on his uniform. He had dealt with difficult tourists before, and he would undoubtedly deal with them again. His focus remained on his duty and his service to the crown, but the incident had served as a teaching moment for other tourists. The video had been shared widely as an example of how not to behave when visiting cultural sites and monuments. Tour guides now regularly showed it to their groups as a cautionary tale. 6 months after the incident, the Texas tourist finally found a new job. It paid less than his previous position, and he had to work for a company in another city where fewer people recognized him. The daily commute was long and expensive, but he was grateful to have steady income again. He and his girlfriend had decided to try couples therapy to work through their problems. The therapist helped them understand how the incident had affected both of them, and they slowly began to rebuild their relationship. It would never be quite the same, but they were learning to move forward together. One evening, as they sat in their small apartment, She brought up the idea of taking another vacation someday. Maybe we could go somewhere quiet, she suggested. Somewhere we can just relax and enjoy each other's company. He nodded, but both of them knew that international travel might be complicated for years to come. The criminal record would affect his ability to get visas for many countries, and they would need time to rebuild their savings. If we do travel again, he said quietly, I promise I'll be respectful of local customs and laws. I've learned my lesson. The hardest part of the whole experience was knowing that it had all been completely avoidable. If he had just listened to his girlfriend's warnings, if he had thought about the consequences before acting, if he had shown basic respect for another person doing their job, none of this would have happened. A year later, he still received occasional messages from people who had seen the video. Most were negative, but surprisingly, a few were from people thanking him for the lesson his mistake had taught them. Some parents said they had shown the video to their teenagers as an example of how quickly poor decisions can have life-changing consequences. He had never intended to become a cautionary tale, but that's exactly what had happened. His moment of poor judgment had taught thousands of people around the world about the importance of respecting others, following laws, and thinking before acting. The experience had changed him fundamentally. He was more thoughtful now, more respectful, and much more aware of how his actions affected others. He had learned that real consequences exist for bad behavior, and that privilege and ignorance are not acceptable excuses. Looking back, he could see that the incident at Buckingham Palace had been a turning point in his life. It had cost him financially, professionally, and personally, but it had also forced him to grow up and take responsibility for his actions in a way he never had before. He would never get those carefree moments back, and he would always carry the shame of what he had done. But he had also gained something valuable, a deep understanding of how important it is to treat others with respect, and how quickly everything can change when you fail to do so. The Royal Guard, meanwhile, continued his service with the same dedication and professionalism he had always shown. For David, the incident was just one of many challenges he had faced in his career, handled with the grace and composure that made the Royal Guards respected around the world. In the end, the story served as a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences, often far beyond what we expect or intend. It showed that respect for others, especially those serving in important roles, should never be compromised for a moment of entertainment or social media fame.